Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Fantastic Female Role Models. And today we're going to talk with Jaclyn about how awesome she is and all the cool things she does. So, Jaclyn, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody so they know who you are and what you're about?
Cool. Well, thanks for having me, Mike. I'm Jaclyn,
Mhm.
and I am a music educator in Wisconsin, and I am happy to be here. I am all about music and education and community and empowerment, and that those are the guiding principles of my work. And I'm excited to be here to talk about whatever Mike wants to talk about. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
gonna be fun.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm all about too. So we're not necessarily music. I'm not so great at music, but
Everyone is a musician.
I'm a
It just
supporter.
depends
I'm
how
a
much
supporter
practice.
of music. I am not a great musician, but I support it.
You are,
Yeah,
truly.
yeah. Yeah. I've tried many times and failed each time to be a musician, so I've thoroughly given up. But that's okay. That's what people like you are for, to teach
Yeah.
people who can learn to be musicians.
Well, and I think more so to remind you that you are a musician, that it's your birthright. It's what you're born with.
Right.
And it's the job of people like me to just open you up to that possibility in yourself and give you the tools to reconnect with your inner musician in ways that are not scary or demeaning and help you feel empowered in your musicking self. So yeah,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
believe you're a musician, Mike, and I think with encouragement and practice, you'll learn to own it. Is what I'm going to say to that.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay. So along that line, then, what inspired you to become an educator then?
Mm.
Um, because like I was at one point an educator, and there was something obviously that inspired me, but um, what was there, like a particular person, or was there like a particular like moment in your life where you're like, yes, this is what I want to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there were a lot of people who knew that I was going to be an educator before I did. My parents talk about like seeing me play school all the time when I was a little kid. And of course, I
Mhm.
was always the teacher. And I was in a series of like children's choirs and school choirs and things growing up. And the choral music teachers in my life were always very intentional of giving me these leadership opportunities. And it was always very fun and I had a great time, but I was like, I'm going to be a pediatrician. That's my path. And my music teacher at school told me one day, she was like, look, I believe you've been picked by the gods to be a music teacher. And I was like, lady, you're crazy. And then my junior year, at the end of the year, she asked me if I wanted to be her intern for my senior year of high school.
Yeah.
And for one of my classes during the day to basically student teach with her, like as a
Oh,
senior in high
that's
school,
cool.
and to like intern with the freshman choir and that sort of thing. And then, like a month into the school year, she said, oh, by the way, I am leaving for a couple of weeks to go sing with a professional chorus in Texas, and you're my sub, and you're in charge of the
Is that
chorus and
legal?
also of some of these other choirs too, including the choir that you're in as a student. Um, so it was me and the accompanist. And I will never forget this one day that I was leading a rehearsal, and it was a treble choir piece.
Hmm.
And we were going like section by section to get this part and then layering the parts on top. And all of a sudden, this just like this magic came into
Right.
the room and everyone was listening so deeply around them and interacting and like,
Yeah.
whoa, we did that. And I came out of there and I wasn't supposed to, but I pulled out my cell phone in the middle of the school day and I called my choir teacher and said, this is it. This is it. I can't imagine doing anything else with my life. You were right.
Right.
And it only took me a couple of years to figure it out. And now this is what I'm going to do with my life. And nothing is going to be better than this. I've had an epiphany, right?
Right.
And
Yeah. Like
then
a moment.
I changed all my applications for college to apply to music education programs, and
Hmm.
I've never looked back. And
Oh,
that was a long time ago. That was
yeah.
like 12 years ago when
Right.
that happened. 13 years now, and
Yeah.
it's been worth every step. Yeah.
Nice. Is that legal for her to like put you in charge as a high school senior?
Well, I went to a private school, so
Oh, so it
you
totally
can kind of do whatever you want.
so it's all good. Yeah, who
It's all
cares?
good. It was a private school, and my other teachers of my other disciplines were so incredibly supportive. And there was this big concert thing while she was gone for grandparents and special friends day,
Sure,
which
right.
was like
Okay.
a big, like come in and be old with the younger people kind of thing,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah,
feel loved and see what they're up to and what they're learning. And the choir always sang at grandparents day,
right.
and I directed the choir. I conducted the choir at Grandparents' Day, and it was like this massive thing. But to do that, I had to go rehearse like the other classes during the day. So my
Right.
other teachers actually gave me latitude to like miss their class to go work with choirs happening. I mean, it was
Because you
incredible.
were
But
like literally an employee.
my whole village of educators was just like, you need to do this. Like, go do this project. It was really beautiful. Yeah. So totally legal since I went to a private school. Would not
Gotcha.
have
I was
been
just saying.
as legal in public realm. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you never really wanted to be like a performer, or not like you don't want to be like a professional singer. You're content with teaching and all that.
No, I mean, I think I would consider myself to be a professional musician, right? And when people
Right.
ask what do you do, I'll say I'm a professional musician. I'm a music educator,
Gotcha.
and of course, like to do that well, you have to be good at what you do, right? If you're going to teach
Sure.
anything. So I trained with singing at a pre-professional level in the conservatory of music, but
Right.
performing is just not what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah.
Something about the synergy
Mhm.
of people experiencing something together and the magic of learning.
Mhm.
And I think the beauty of watching young people awaken to their own potential through their learning, that just being part of that experience, being able to facilitate that experience in some ways, or co-facilitate, co-create with my students,
Right.
that to me personally cannot be matched by just singing for
Mhm.
people. So yeah,
Right.
never had a desire to perform, only to teach.
Gotcha. Well,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of teachers who become teachers because that's like what they settled for
Mm,
after not being able to do the thing that they really wanted to do. And it's
mm,
really cool that you're like, this is what I want to do from the beginning. Like, this isn't me settling. Like, I've hit my high point. Like, I'm a music educator. Deal
yeah.
with it, sort of thing.
Yeah,
Like
I
that.
think it's
That
I think
attitude is good.
I think it's kind of a trope. Like I know a lot of people who double majored in performance and education,
Right.
but I think education is a really tough profession.
Sure.
And if you are going to be a teacher, and particularly if you're going to be a music teacher for your career, you
Hmm.
have to buy it yourself.
Right.
And if you are not in it academically, professionally, personally,
Hmm.
like there's so many other things that someone could settle for that probably will pay more and not
Right.
be as
That are
painful as teaching, right?
not nearly as much work
And
as being a
so if
teacher.
you're going to be a music educator, you have to want to do that. And
Right.
I think this whole like if you can't do teach thing,
Hmm.
it does lead a lot of people to pursue education as a possible backup gig, but they don't last long when they get there. Or
Sure.
they get there and they're like, oh, this is where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, welcome.
I looked down on this for so long, and then realized I was wrong.
Yeah. But I think rarely are there people who truly stick it out and are unhappy because it's not worth it because the profession is not very forgiving.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
the structure of it nationally
Right.
and like just as a public profession is not worth it unless you really want it and are willing to fight for the right to be an educator.
Right.
And
Well,
so
I mean, yeah, if you're in the eyes of these parents and they're expecting something from you, and those expectations vary, but like, they, regardless of what they are, they're always impeccably high, regardless of their willingness to step in and be a part of that process, which I always find really frustrating. It's like, I understand that you want me to do my job really well, but like, you're not putting in your
mm,
effort. That happened to me a lot. I know when I taught, it would be like,
that can be hard.
like, I just need you to like bare minimum help your kids. And they'd be like, no, that's what you're for. And I'm like, cool.
Yeah, that's tough when you have that dynamic. And I think as far as music goes, there are a lot of parents who come at singing from the I can't like a deficit model of singing.
Sure.
And so I feel like as a choral music teacher, I can't even ask my students' parents to help them, because a lot of them would be like, well, I can't sing. And neither
Sure.
can the kid. Like they'll just straight up say that to their kid.
Mhm.
So the only tool that I have as far as advocacy goes, the most powerful tool is through the students themselves. And
Right.
for the students to go home and say, guess what I learned in chorus today, right?
Right.
And to
Mhm.
help them be totally self-sufficient,
Yeah.
and advocate in the home. And then
Right.
if the kids are so excited about their learning, the parents will come and support them. But
Right.
really, I rarely do I have parents who demand of me a high level of like choral music art kind of conversation, because most
Right.
of them don't know. Like
Yeah.
they
Absolutely.
know the look on their kid's face when their kid feels proud. And
Right.
really, like in my curriculum, at least, the thing I'm teaching is the kids through music. And
Right.
so if I stay centered on that, then I'm speaking the parents' language.
Right.
But it's hard. Then also it's a double-edged sword, because I don't get the conversations about like content with the parents and curriculum.
Right.
What I do get is that I have to explain it, because a lot of the parents don't have that connection, or they have a traumatic experience with their own music
Right.
education.
Absolutely.
And that can be tough too.
Yeah. Well, I had the same idea with like math and science.
Yes.
It's like you walk up and you're like, "Hi, I teach algebra," and like the whole room like shudders. And or like I really when I left teaching and I was working in other places, talking about talking with my coworkers, are like, "Oh, what did it's like, what did you do before this?" And I was like, "Oh, I was a teacher." And they're like, "Okay, and what did you teach?" And I'm like, "Oh, I was an algebra teacher." And they'd like look at me like, uh-huh. And
Yeah.
like like those kind of conversations, like it was hard to like when I had to center my classroom around the idea that I'm going to be sending you back to your house and there isn't going to be anybody there who can help you with this.
Mm-hmm.
And um that I feel like makes it a little bit more difficult, because you're trying to cram all that stuff into the time that you have with them, and you only get 45 minutes a day. And
Every other day in my case.
right, exactly, yeah. And it's like
Yeah. And
you
now, of course, like what an interesting opportunity for the student to be doing the learning in their home, and for the parents to be like walking by in the
right, and
background,
like
hear
experiencing it.
and see. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're in the classroom, the parent
pretty
is.
much. Yeah.
So I'm seeing this as like, I have to assume that there's someone else in the background all the time. And
Listening.
what
Right.
an opportunity, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. You're gonna
Yeah.
hook a parent in somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And the assignments that I can give of like, share this with someone in your home, have a
Right.
conversation, write down what they said. And that's the assignment.
Right.
And the kid can just like take their computer into the next room at some time when their parent is available, or their adult in the home, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
have that conversation. And that's really cool. It's
Right. And
cool.
just type it in while they're going. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I haven't really gotten to experience a lot of the virtual school kind of stuff, because Cam's like what, in first grade. And so like his virtual school is like they're doing addition and subtraction right now,
Mm.
which is cool and all, but like Cam's been able to add and subtract since he was like 3.
Well, his
So
dad's a math teacher, so of
that's
course.
true. Yeah, he did get a little help there. But so it's like he'll log on to his math. He's like, "Dad, we're doing adding again." And I was like, "We'll do multiplying later, buddy. Don't worry." But I feel like, and that's not necessarily his teacher's fault. Like he's got all sorts of kids in his class that are definitely not able to add. Cameron, I'm doing an interview, remember? Thank you.
You're
Um,
talking about me.
I heard my name.
Oh,
Yeah. So, but I guess I'm gonna be working in a school starting tomorrow, so I get to be a part of that again. So that'll be interesting
good.
to catch up. Yeah. So we already kind of talked about this a little bit, but are there any other challenges to teaching music, other than like maybe not necessarily having a supportive parent, or like I always feel like, at least in my experience at like my high school, the music and the drama kids were the ones who, and maybe I'm just getting this from like TV shows and stuff too, but like there's always like something going on, and like there's like they're competing for parts and blah and blah.
Oh yeah, it's
Right.
all B.
And
It's B
everybody's
all the
cutthroat.
time.
They want to get the best. They want to be the lead, or they want to get the solo, or like whatever. Like, is that like, do you have to deal with a lot of like those kind of like social emotional issues as well as teaching your content as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the interesting thing about teaching a discipline that is inherently social and emotional, because
Right.
chorus, like the definition of chorus is musicking with other people, right? So
Right.
if you're singing a solo, you're not in a chorus.
Yeah.
You're just by yourself. So there's this whole element of like the construct of individuality within the community.
Hmm.
Um, that, of course, my goal is to create a classroom where students can bring their whole selves into the room, which means they bring their whole self into the room, right? And that
Yeah.
includes everything that's going on outside of the room and all of the like interpersonal connections within the
Right.
room as
Yeah.
well. Um, and so I think like the having the foundational perspective that I'm teaching people through music instead of teaching music as a subject area, like not superimposing the content on the student, but rather like mining the student's own innate musical gifts and skills for that connection and for that learning, I think centers in on the social emotional part and also affirms for the students that they can bring their whole self into the space.
Right.
Which of course sometimes is a challenge, right? Because we are dealing with human beings and those are complex, amazing creatures, particularly middle schoolers who are going through one of the most tumultuous
Times
periods
of
of
their
growth
lives.
in their
Yeah.
lives.
Hmm.
Everything in their bodies and their lives is changing. All of their like understanding of themselves as emotional human beings is changing.
Hmm.
All of their relationships and friendships and their sense of self in relation to that is changing.
Right.
And my job is to create opportunities for them to explore that and build the skills necessary to navigate through life through
Hmm.
music in constructive and healthy ways,
Right.
which is an awesome challenge and a big responsibility. Um, but
Right.
I think it's the art of teaching is in that challenge.
Hmm.
There are a lot of people who teach beautiful choral music, and that's great for them. My focus is to make beautiful choral music by teaching the human beings in the room. And
Right.
so like that is the ever-present challenge, is being responsive to my students. And then I think through that, like that mines support within the student for themselves,
Hmm.
within the student for the people around them,
Right.
and also for their community, right? Because if their people at home hear them talking about, oh, like I felt so good in chorus today when we had this conversation, or
Right.
learn the perspective, right? Then that just like implicitly builds that sense of connection and community and support for the discipline of like the transformative power of music education and
Hmm.
singing in community, I think in particular.
Right.
But it is a challenge. And I think also um, one of the challenges with singing is that singing is perceived as a talent. And there's so many great things about having all of these like singing shows on TV. Kind of started with American Idol, right? If you
Right.
if
Yeah.
you remember that era. But now we've got like, now no one's heard of American Idol, and no one's actually even heard of Glee anymore, which really makes me feel old. But it's like The Voice and The Masked Singer and America's
Oh, I
Got
watched The Masked
Talent,
Singer.
and all
Yeah.
of these
It's a
things,
good one.
right?
Right.
Um, and and the word talent also is just a big challenge in itself, because you have kids walking into the room or the virtual room, who are in chorus for a myriad of reasons. And
Right.
some of those reasons include because I can't play an instrument, or
Hmm.
because I didn't want to play an instrument, so what else was I going to do?
Hmm.
Or I'm just here to be social with my friends, or I really like singing, or I think I'm awesome at singing, right? And it
Yeah.
like runs the gamut.
I'm going to
And
Broadway. Here
yeah,
I
and
am.
that's a beautiful thing. Like, go be Ethel Merman, go do it. But here you have to do it with other people. And I never heard Ethel Merman sing in a chorus, but I bet it would have been challenging for her. Like, you have to adjust your timbre, right?
Yeah.
And make it fit
Right.
with other people. And so the convincing element is always such a fun, like anthropological challenge for me. And for the kids who come in the room that are like, I hate singing and I'm not good at it. We had the most beautiful brainstorm the other day in class,
Hmm.
which was focusing on the skill of confidence in singing.
Yeah.
And even if you have to sing with fake confidence, like how to do that and what impact it has. And we did this brainstorm on what is a time in your life when you've had less confidence at something, and then you now you have more confidence. And then what's the story of that gap, right?
Right.
The things they put in the chat were amazing. I mean, it was examples from like getting more confident tackling people in football, to
Mm-hmm.
getting more confident riding a unicycle, to getting more confident speaking in class or meeting
Sure.
new people, or like all of these were skills and
Right.
experience. And then we just talked about it. And I said, why do we put singing in this separate box?
Mm-hmm.
It's a skill too. Like none of us were born knowing how to ride a unicycle. None of us were born knowing how to talk or walk or
Right.
run or touch a football. So why do we have this like fixed mindset about singing? And that is a real challenge, like
Break
psycho,
down those
and
mental
talk about the
barriers.
home loop. Because if you have parents at home who are modeling that and being like, oh, I'm terrible at singing, or you're terrible at singing, right? Then it's gonna facilitate that talk.
Right.
Um, so deconstructing that within the context of like students being whole people and knowing that they're not going to be great at everything,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right. Yeah.
Like keeping it education oriented, that is a big challenge, but it also is a great gift of
Yeah.
teaching. Teaching singing in particular offers a really cool opportunity to meet that head on and like get at some really essential life skills that will help our students to be good people, not
Right.
just good musicians.
Yeah. Now, to get back to that point, when I taught math, I feel like I had a similar situation. So like I taught algebra, and algebra is kind of like this big barrier for people, much like singing can be for others.
Mhm.
Um, and I remember I always the first day of class we'd be like going through the syllabus, and I'd be like, okay, algebra can be challenging. It might be really hard for you. And for some people, it might be really easy. And they'd be like, and they all kind of get that like scared face, like, is it going to be me? Is it going to be me that has the hard time? And, I was like, but you know what? It's okay because we can do this together. And the reason I know that is because the first time I took algebra, I failed it. And they all just looked at me like, what? And I was like, yeah, I got an F, a big old F. They had to transfer me out of the class halfway through the school year because I was that bad at it. And they were like, no. And I was like, yes, they redid my whole schedule. Like it was a thing. And they were like, and I was like, and I was in 8th grade. And they'd all be like, I'm in 8th grade. And they like freak out. And then I'd be like, but you know what? Guess what? I'm an algebra teacher now. Like I've clearly figured it out. And
Mhm.
like, if I can get there, you know, going from biggest academic failure of my life to teaching it,
Yeah.
then you can do this too, right?
Yep.
And then they're all like, oh, okay, like after they've gone through like their like internal panic, like because you can read it in their faces, they're all sitting there like, it's gonna be me, it's gonna be me. And like I think when I was in middle school, if I ever had to take a choir class, that would have been me on the first day. Like I would have had like that, like, oh no, this is
Mhm.
bad. Like, because like when I did my music courses in middle school, because they were required, like I remember 6th grade, like everybody took just like general music. And then 7th and 8th grade, you had to take an elective.
Mhm.
And I had 3 choices, and it was like, okay, I could take guitar or piano, or the third one was like actual like music theory. And I was like, well, that one's not for me. So that one got cut out right away. So I ended up taking guitar and piano because those were the only 2 options that I felt comfortable even trying to attempt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, kudos to you for getting, because I've met your students. We taught in the same building. Like I know how your classroom, I don't know exactly how your classroom works, but I see the byproduct of it. I've seen it. So like
Yeah.
that kind of getting those people to do the things that they do, even when they come to my class, they have this whole different level of confidence. But when I see them come out of a lot like your class, it was always different. Or like I know that I had your entire choir class, like because of the way our schedule was structured or something like that. Like your whole choir class was one of my science classes. So like the class before lunch, your entire choir class would walk in, and like, so I'd get to teach your choir class, and they'd be like, today we're going to do this with Mrs. Kottman, and it's going to be great. And, like, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. And they'd be like, Mr. Mankey, do you sing? And I'd be like, no. And they'd be like, oh, come on, you can totally do it. And, like that kind of stuff. And I'd be like, they're like, why don't you sing for us right now? And I was like, why don't? And we just like,
no, but really,
science instead, you know?
yeah. And this is another really important difference, I think, too, that you're bringing up, is this issue of compliance in the class, right? And you know, that science and math are essential subjects. They're lifted up as like core learning, right? And everybody in life, what do you do when someone says, oh, but I don't like math? They're like, but you need it for life and you have to do it. Like, it's a life skill, right? You need it for life. And in a lot of ways, I think that is true.
It is, yeah.
Conceptually understand how numbers work in order to do basic adulting, right? Like, you have to understand the relationships between things to know how much you can spend. Like, forecasting and like, even on a very basic level, it goes a little bit beyond just like adding and subtracting. To really be good at it. But you know, it's math and science are tested subjects, and they have that level of like compliance expectation. And music doesn't, because at a certain point, students can choose not to take it anymore. And so there's also this added element of like, this is my chance to get it, like to turn them onto their own abilities, so that they have this to feed their spirit for potentially the rest of their life. Not as a professional singer, but like a person who can sing with their kids or their nieces and nephews, or a person who patronizes their local concerts or like nonprofit arts organizations, to keep the arts alive, because they understand the value of arts in people's lives, not just like because you have to, because they don't have to, is the thing. And that's another challenge, right? It's like this element of convincing and like, I gotta get them, you know.
You gotta
mostly for themselves, not for the discipline, but like for their own innate abilities, so that when they go to worship and they open a hymn book or whatever, they
feel confident singing because they know that they can,
and also to know more broadly than that, to know that their voice has power and worth, and their voice is important and worth hearing. Because I think a lot of middle schoolers, for a variety of reasons, feel disenfranchised, and there's the angsty teen, right? No one understands me. Like, okay, well, do you know how to make yourself heard in constructive ways, responsive to the environment around you? That's what singing can teach you in a group, right? You have to
absolutely.
To be heard within the context, or to back off to let someone else's voice be heard. And you have to be able to modulate your tone and your emotions when you express yourself, right? And like choose to use your voice in different ways, and recognizing that, oh, I have the power to make those choices. Oh, it can help me be a better speaker, communicator,
friend,
right? Totally.
Absolutely. These poor middle schoolers.
They're making it. The kids are all right. They are all right.
They try their hardest.
Yeah.
This is I guess kind of a video series about women in particular. Are there any like obstacles you've faced in teaching or in life, or really in anything, just because you are a woman? Or if you feel like there's any time that has held you back, or because of maybe other people who've already made decisions about you because you're a woman, or anything like that?
I think this is a really interesting question, particularly to ask an educator, because education is such a female-dominated
female thing,
stereotypically, and that wasn't always the case.
No, absolutely not.
Actually, what happened, and I discovered this on my research for graduate school, is that people realized when education became public and there was a national mandate, they realized that if they hired more women, they didn't have to spend as much money on schools because they could pay them less, justifiably. And that's how there became so many women in the field of education, right? Which is a horrifying thought. And then men very quickly realized, oh, I can make more money elsewhere because I'm not going to hit the glass ceiling, right? Which is also why there are more men who are administrators in schools. And interestingly, there's not as much of a gap gender-wise in secondary education, right, collegiate and high school, as there is with middle school and elementary. So it's interesting. And I think that's a double-edged sword, because all the schools that I've taught in, with the exception of a couple years in one school, have had male administrators.
Right.
And male like supervisors.
Right.
Many of my collegiate professors were men.
Right.
Some of my cooperating teachers were men. And I think as a woman, sometimes the assumption is, oh, well, yeah, of course you're going to be good at teaching because, you know, you're a girl.
Right. Of course. It's your sworn and born duty.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you're
Mm-hmm.
a lecturer, right? Which also makes, I think, some students surprised when I'm like, let's go. And they're like, whoa, what? I
Right.
think, and also I have to situate this within my own identity, right? As a white woman,
Sure.
or white passing, I suppose, depending on who you ask, because my family is Jewish. And so some people
Oh,
would consider me to be not white, but you wouldn't know that, right? By
right.
like,
But just looking at you. Right.
ethnicity wise, I identify as white, and I have class privilege and educational privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I've had different challenges as a woman than others, but not as much in my field in particular.
Mm-hmm.
I think just moving through the world and into positions of leadership, and in conversations with people in the world. The most interesting thing, I think, the most interesting experience I had as a woman in education was before I started teaching, before I went to college, actually, when I was talking with my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
who graduated college in 1949 or 50 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Where she had to go to a 2-year like preparatory school and then to university because they didn't allow any girls until junior year, kind of thing. You had to go to finishing school first or whatever. It was, anyways, a women's liberal arts college, and it was very like empowering. So it wasn't stereotypical like finishing school thing.
Right.
But she had always wanted to be a lawyer. Like she
Yeah.
would love to have been a lawyer and couldn't because she was a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so they basically told her, like, secretary or teacher, what do you want? And she felt that teaching was going to be more intellectually stimulating, so she chose teaching. And then she saw me coming along, especially someone who's really keen on arguing, and who she felt probably could have been a lawyer. It does feel some days like that in my in my classroom, to be perfectly honest. Both sides.
Right.
And jury and judge and all the things. But when I told her that I wanted to be a teacher, she was, I think, a bit disappointed.
Because she saw that as like the only limited choices that she had, and you were actively choosing to.
Yeah.
Right.
You have the whole world of choices open to you. Why would you
pick that one?
Which, of course, feminism is having the choice, right? And
pick
make that choice and not have it made for you. And then I think she found great solace in like, oh, but you're not just a teacher. And then I was like, let's unpack that. Like, oh man. But I think like she gets it now, and she's so incredibly supportive. And she was a leader in education. She was on the state board of education in her state. And so now loves to talk with me all about my experiences of being a teacher.
Right.
But I think, I've never gotten pushback on that in my field because that's a typical thing for women to do. But it's perhaps not as typical for women to be teachers and to be data oriented, or to be able to handle discipline and management on their own.
Right.
And I had a colleague once say to me, we were talking, I don't know, casual, like lunchroom chatter, I guess, about like our lives outside of school, and shared that I was, like dating some guys or whatever. And he was like, oh, but you always wear pants and you're like a strong teacher. And I was like, okay. So that's, I think, also something that kind of goes with like, oh, women as teachers, you're probably so nurturing and so sweet. And like, I strive to lead with kindness and empathy always.
Right.
But I have high expectations as an educator is not just a thing that men do. Like, strong women are teachers too. And there's kind of have to counteract that gender perception sometimes, I think. Or with people who meet me and are like, oh, you're a teacher. That's so cute. What do you teach? And I'm like, middle school. And they go, oh, like, you must be really tough.
Yeah.
Be afraid.
I've taken some hits. Like, I'm in it.
Right. You're doing it. I love it. It's crazy. I love it. Middle schools are the creatures. But I think, that's it's interesting moving through this profession as a woman because of all of those reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. All of that. Just, yeah. I don't know. Like, um, one part of what you were talking about reminded me of, once again, like when I left teaching, um, the perception of me because I said I was a teacher was interesting. And it doesn't really necessarily in any way relate to your experience as a woman, or, you know, your experience as someone who's Jewish who can pass as like as a white woman. But it was always interesting to me that these assumptions about me because of me being a teacher, and then um, I guess like going on from there, their assumptions about what else was kind of my deal because of that. So like I ended up working in a lot of blue collar, um, you know, not necessarily skilled jobs, but like jobs that people, I guess you could say now they were essential jobs. I worked a lot of essential jobs. And the people who had been, you know, like I worked in a grocery store. So there are these people who I was working with who had been in groceries like their entire life. And like, they're like, yeah, I've been working in a grocery store since I was 16. And like, I was like, oh, I was a teacher. And they're like, how they perceived me and what they thought of me as a person immediately changed once they knew that. And so I ended up at a certain point, I just stopped telling people stuff about that. So I would be, because like the way I was treated would be so different. So like when I was assumed to be just like a young kid who wanted to work in a grocery store for some reason, they treated me as like one of them. And then when I revealed that I was college educated, then their perception of me shifted, and all of a sudden they're like, well, you must be an expert at this and blah blah blah, or they'd make those kind of assumptions about me, or like that I would know certain things just because I had been, you know, through higher education.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so once again, not the same as what you like, your kind of maybe like the kind of experiences you've had. Like that one comment from your colleague is
I
horrendous.
think that it goes to people making presumptions and assumptions and the implicit bias that we carry with us based on our own experiences, right? And
Yeah, absolutely.
implicit bias, you know, we often talk about that in terms of race and ethnicity, but it goes to class, it goes to education. There's implicit bias about gender and all sorts of things,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, how you move through the world is impacted by how other people see you and treat you, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's I think that's certainly part of it. So I understand
Yeah.
the different
It
ways that people treat you once they learn more about who you are.
Oh yeah, it was a crazy realization for me. It was like,
Oh.
whoa, because I don't know, like I grew up in an affluent suburb in Illinois, and so my worldview has up until I would say I came to Appleton and went to college was very, very closed off. Um, and like my parents, you know, my parents tried to give me opportunities to like learn and see all the different viewpoints and whatever, but like there's only so much you can do when, especially when your parents are telling you to do it. And so you know, and so then I, you know, so like, you know, I came to Appleton and I was learning about all, you know, like all these things, and I became, you know, more open to all these ideas. And then I left this, I guess you could call it, you know, this bubble of educated whitedom, and was like, whoa, like it was just really culture shocky to me. Um, and I feel like, um, I guess that's something that's kind of good and bad about being a teacher, because I know that we get taught to to accept everybody's viewpoints, and we learn about how everybody's culture is different. But they always caveat that with, but you know, you have to know about your biases and your experiences. And it's like, you know, and I thought I had a pretty decent rap on mine until I met these people, and I was like, okay, I didn't actually realize that it's the people who I was now interacting with on a daily basis had seemed very foreign to me. Like there was no way that there could be someone quite like this who lives down the street from me. But now all of a sudden it was like, oh, and now I understand a lot more about the kids I was teaching, because I understand where they're coming from a lot better than when I was the rich kid from Chicago who is now teaching, them math. So, you know, those kind of, you're stuck in your own head until you have those experiences. And so, um, yeah, wow, I really lost my train of thought there.
I mean, people
But yeah,
know what you know, and that's the work, right? The work
right,
is the anti-racist work, the justice work is sitting with that, and then not just sitting with it,
right.
and having that open-mindedness to interrogate your perspectives,
Hmm.
um, and to interrogate your first thought, and then to not let it be your last thought, right? And when I encounter a
Absolutely.
student who is behaving in ways that are such a departure from what I would expect, or
Hmm.
maybe know how to respond to, then my job as an educator is to take a step back and say, oh, why is this surprising to me? Or
Right,
how did I expect that? Why did I expect the student to act a different way instead of just meeting them where they're at? And
right.
then to say, okay, where are they coming from? What do I
Hmm.
know about this kid as a whole person? And now, based on what I know about them as a person and based on what I know about me, how do I choose to respond? Because the way that I might like knee jerk want to respond, I have to be able to take a step back and say, okay, where's that coming from? Like that decision I'm about to make in the moment, is
Hmm.
it coming from my experiences? Is it coming from my knowledge of that kid? Is it coming from my decision, like holistic decision as an educator to respond in this way? And
Right,
that also is part of the art of teaching, right? Because all of that has to happen in a second,
right.
in, in like a brief interaction.
Hmm.
So to have all of those awarenesses like kind of cycling through, to know how to respond to a student, like it helps with everything, right? With colleagues,
Right,
with people on the street, with whatever. And to do the work is to actively broaden your perspective, and then
right,
try to not just empathize, but like actualize what other people need. Uh,
right. Or
yeah.
what they think about and how they interpret the world is not necessarily going to be the way you do. And um the and as surprising as that may be to you, you have to realize that um as a teacher especially, you're expected to be neutral in so many ways. Um, and sometimes I even felt restricted to the point of where like you can't even at some points empathize with children, because then you're not being neutral enough. Um, at least that's how I felt dealing with the people I had to deal with as an educator. It's like um, you know, kids are coming to you with problems that they're having, and they're not necessarily like anything terrible or awful. They're middle school problems. It's like, like I don't, it's like I think my friend hates me. It's like they probably don't, like that kind of thing. But like I understand where you're coming from. Like, yeah, anxiety, it's a thing. Like I understand, but like you have to walk this line of empathizing and trying to be helpful without being too helpful. You know what I mean? Like if you're too helpful, then you could be, especially if you're a male teacher and you're working with female students, then all of a sudden you've breached this matter of inappropriateness. And it's this weird fine line that can like wiggle and sway depending on who you're talking to and who you're working with. And it's like no matter what my response was, I'm always trying to help this kid deal with their things, and I'm not trying to be sinister or but that line was always something that I always had to be extremely cognizant of, um, especially because I wasn't in a teaching position where I was working on social and emotional learning. I was supposed to be teaching math, and it's like it's really hard to teach kids to be good kids when you're trying to teach them math, and that content is important, and you're trying to get them prepared for this test. And it's like, yeah, but I also want to make sure that they're good people. Like,
Well, but when that's the culture of the school and those are the expectations, that's
right,
one thing. I don't think every school is like that. And I think
absolutely,
that
yeah,
the understanding of education as we're now coming to see it more in the literature and in the research is that the social emotional learning is the underpinning of everything, because these are human
Right.
beings. And if you just want people to learn content, teach them through a pre-recorded video. But if you want to be responsive to what they need, and you want to be able to validate and affirm where they're coming from, and also help them to develop those lifelong skills that they need to be balanced human beings in their own life, whatever life presents at them,
Mm-hmm.
it's part of teaching. Like we have human beings in front of us live to whom we need to be responsive and empathic
Right.
and move our classroom toward justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't just teach content. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to say otherwise is ignoring the art of education in many ways, which is that you have to teach human beings through your content, or teach content in a way that's responsive to the human beings in the room.
Sure.
And part of that is recognizing that everyone is bringing something different to the classroom, and to make your classroom a space where everyone can bring whatever they're going through in their life or processing, and to understand that they are valued for it.
Right.
And it sounds like, maybe as a woman, the presumption that I am nurturing and kind and all that can work in my advantage in some ways, because I am expected to do that. And yet
Right.
I had those same conversations, which was, you're not focused enough on content, you're too focused on the kids. And I was like,
Think about what you just said
right.
and then
So
get back to me.
yeah, and I think the research, like there's a reason that this whole concept of social emotional learning, SEL,
Right.
and culturally responsive teaching and learning, like all of these things are very much in vogue. They have been for a while, but I think they're becoming more like mainstream and in the water, right, in the jargon and all these
Right.
things. And there's a reason for that, right? And
Right.
because education's on this big pendulum, and it
Mm-hmm.
was very like child focused and holistic like focused, and then it swung out of necessity very much over to the data, right? And like,
Right.
what does data tell us, and the content and things. Well, now the data is telling us that we're missing the whole person in
Right.
the curriculum. So now the pendulum is swinging again, and maybe someday in the cosmic like evolution of education, maybe it'll someday center in the middle, which is honoring and educating the whole person
Right.
with the content that's important for them to develop into educated persons, right?
Individual. Right.
Choices in their life.
Mhm.
But gosh, you have to teach the whole people in
Oh
the room.
yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
So I think you were on the right track with those conversations with your students. And I don't think teaching is neutral. I think teaching, in anyone who says that their classroom is a neutral space needs to take a closer look at their classroom,
Oh,
because
right.
we all, like, our classrooms are not neutral. They are dynamic,
Mhm.
and they're always moving. And sometimes teachers are told you need to be neutral, and it scares us to step away from our authenticity,
Right.
from those moments of like real human learning and interaction.
Mhm.
But I will actively say that my classroom is I'm striving to move toward justice, in my
Right.
classroom, and that is my work.
Yeah.
Um, no excuses.
Why weren't you my principal?
I'm not an administrator. I'm an educator.
But you should be. Um, you get it. Um, yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Like I was thinking about that a couple days ago actually, because when I did leave teaching, um, like I kind of disappeared off the web where my students couldn't find me. And about a year and a half ago, I like reopened up so
Hmm.
that because I was like, I felt comfortable enough at that point where it was like, you know what, they're all in high school.
Yeah. Mhm.
They can make their own decisions for the most part. If they want to seek me out, they can seek me out. I feel okay with that. And
Mhm.
so I think it was just 2 or 3 days ago, one of my former students, like, started talking with me. Like he messaged me on Instagram and I was like, oh, this is different because I don't think we particularly got along very well when we were a teacher student
Huh.
relationship. And so, but he was like, like, how are you doing? Like, are you still teaching? Like all this stuff. And I was like,
Oh.
this is interesting. But like, um, Now I'm trying to remember where I was going with it. Oh, okay. But so, you know, I think in that teacher-student relationship, I guess we got on amicably because I was supposed to be neutral and he wasn't really supposed to know what I was thinking. And in the back of my head, as we were talking, I was like, if he knew what I, like what my, whatever thoughts they may be, religious, political, social, emotional, whatever, if he knew what I was all about, he probably wouldn't be messaging me.
Mm.
And so those kind of conversations that I've had in my head about should I open up my and like reach out to these kids that I care about immensely, it's like, when I was teaching, they couldn't know any of that about me, or at least they weren't supposed to. And I think if they really had paid attention, they would have been able to figure it out. Like, it's not that hard, just based on how I talk and like how I teach. But like, as middle schoolers, they don't really figure that kind of stuff out. That's something that they have to like, I think someone would have to like literally tell them. They're like, did you know that Mr. Mangian thinks this? And they'd be like, what? And so like that kind of, and maybe this is just like this might be controversial in the schools of education, but I feel like teachers should be able to, at least in like a small regards, be able to reveal that kind of stuff about themselves, because we're people too, and we're supposed to be teaching these kids how to be adults and functioning human beings. And if they're going to participate in our democratic process, they need to know that there are adults that think and act and do, that they have civic responsibilities and they do have opinions about, climate change or social justice or whatever it may be. And they don't necessarily have to agree with us. And I doubt that a lot of the kids that I taught would agree with me on many of the things that I think about. But it always really hurt when I was teaching and they would start talking about something that I knew was just kind of like, oh, you're not thinking it through all the way, or this is a really shallow analysis of what's happening. And I really wanted to engage them in that. But I knew that if I did, I'd be stepping out of my bounds, because in the administration's eyes, I was supposed to teach math, I was supposed to teach science, and that was it. And so if I had broached the topic, I would have gotten really slammed for it. But I felt like as an educator, it was my duty to step in and be like, not necessarily tell them what to think, but at least be like, let's unpack this. Why do you feel this way about this? And where is that coming from? And let's think about other viewpoints. And I know that because of the position I was in, I was restricted from doing that. And I know that as a teacher and as a student, when I was growing up, those were the kind of things that I really valued from my teachers, the ones that were willing to step out of their way and be like, Mike, let's think about what you just said and really, let's try to understand where you're coming from. And I felt really restricted in that way. Whereas, and so now I kind of every once in a while have these moments, right, where some kid messages me and I'm like, like, or it's usually on Instagram, which is for me, very non-political. I try to keep it very, cute pictures of my kid and like, that's pretty much it. But it's like if they saw my Facebook, right, which is very politically charged.
Good thing the kids aren't on Facebook anymore.
I know no one's on Facebook anymore. It's only us adults who use Facebook. But still, it's like, okay, it's like you have this view of me as like this awesome teacher who you love and respect. But it's like if you took that nice teacher veneer off, what would you think? And those are kind of the things that like I struggled with before I quit, was like, oh gosh, kids, like you respect me now, but if you only knew, and I think it's sad to me that we're so focused on the content and the data still. I know it's swinging back, but like we're so focused on that and we're so afraid to have these conversations with these kids that, and maybe not necessarily you or me, but I know a lot of teachers who are, and these kids are missing out on these wonderful potential conversations that they could have,
Mm-hmm.
and really get to explore the things that are truly probably more important in life than whether or not they can do algebra. Like I had a whole PowerPoint explaining why algebra was important because I got asked like twice a year why they had to learn it. And so I made sure I was prepared because my off the cuff answer was never good. Because in all honesty, like unless you're going to be in science or math or accounting, or engineering, you don't use algebra in your daily life.
Well, but I would say I think there are ways to open up these kinds of conversations through the content.
Right.
And I think a lot of people would say, well, yeah, you're a chorus teacher. Okay, so fine, this is true. And my goal, I guess, is not to say like, hey, here's how I feel about this, right? But to ask the right questions, very intentional, to help the students open up their own worldview for each other. So when we were studying the music and the history of the civil rights movement, right? We were learning this song, I'm going to sit at the welcome table, and it was about the sit-ins in the restaurants.
Right.
And we had a series of small group discussions. Some of the questions were, do you think it's okay for business owners to deny someone service based on the color of their skin? What about their religion? What about their sexual orientation?
Right.
What about gender? What about, right? And the number of students who were like, oh, of course it's not okay to tell someone they can't eat at your restaurant because they're Black, but if I were a business owner, I'd be fine saying that to someone who is gay because I don't believe that gay people are correct, right? And I just stepped back and was like, does anyone want to respond to that? Because my job is to create a safe space for all voices.
Right.
Let the students educate each other. There are some things that are not acceptable, right? Like, making concentration camp jokes, not acceptable.
Not okay. Right.
Using racial slurs or like hateful speech, not okay. But asking questions, always okay. And I found that if I selected repertoire and crafted lessons very carefully, there's ways to get at those things. And I also think like if I were a math teacher, because I'm an affective educator and my classroom experience and my teaching is centered on affect or like emotional experience and connection as the bedrock of learning, like to me that's what powers the skill and the knowledge learning. Is the connection, like the personal connection to the experience of learning that thing. There are things we learn in algebra that are essential to life. What is at the cornerstone of algebra? Solving for the unknown. Right. That's what life is, right? And also looking at all of the information that you have to try to figure out what the right answer could be. And you're not told what the right answer is, but you're given all these clues. And what do you do? It's been a long time since I worked an algebra problem that was really complicated, but what do? You have to like unscramble the knowledge that you're given, right, in a meaningful order. And there are steps to follow to do that you like have to learn and establish this construct of figuring out the problem. Then you have to go back and check it, right? And like this is a process of interrogating the information that you're given, solving for the unknown, being a curious human being, practicing the skill of perseverance, and also checking your work, which right now, people, like I wish more people were thinking algebraically about checking facts in the world right now. Like there are such things as facts. And so, and also when you're working collaboratively to solve a problem, you have to work with other people, and it's still that skill of teamwork and the importance of asking questions, right? And so, like what are the other things in life that could be framed like an algebra problem? And how would you quantify those things? And what would you solve for? Like if you could solve for anything, what would you want to solve for? And oh my gosh, see that passion that just got ignited in you from asking that question? Okay, now look at this algebra problem, right? You can come at it with the same vigor. And I think like that, when teachers are given permission to teach in that way, that's not neutrality. Like that's moving the classroom toward equity and toward all voices being heard through a process of collective inquiry, right? And like ownership in the learning. But it's going to power the content, because then the kids are like, oh, I got to solve for the unknown, like the mysteries of the universe, right? Like they get so excited about that. Right. And when the focus is on just like, no, don't teach them how to be inquiring and motivated human beings, just teach them how to do math. Then we miss the fact that there are things we can learn through algebra through just singing, through science, through English, that apply like in the broadest ways to just how we live and move through the world and interact with each other as
Yeah.
human. And that's where our classrooms, like I do think it's hard but important to not actively say like this is what I believe, right?
Right.
Because people look up to us so much and we are highly influential and we want them to come to the right conclusions for themselves.
Right.
However, like I'm going to teach a music and justice unit this year, and we're going to study the music of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Nice.
And there are students who are going to choose to study that, and there are students who are going to choose to study the pro-life movement through music. And both of those to me are fine as long as you meet this content standard, which
Sure.
is connection
Mhm.
and how musicians express things through music.
Right.
And for the students to question their own standpoint.
Mhm.
And when you give them a problem to solve like that, of like, how does music work with this topic? Then they have to think about the topic too.
Right.
And whatever they're coming from, like I hope that they get that skill, even if they never sing in a choir again. If my affective outcome, if my like goal in their like connected emotional learning is that process of interrogation of perspective, as long as they meet that, like the skills and the knowledge may stay with them, but that process can carry over into like every other facet of their life. So that's where the broad spectrum education comes in.
Why weren't you my principal again?
Not an administrator.
That's going to be the theme of this
Because I
video.
love teaching kids too much. That's why.
It's going to be like that book. Are you my mother? Are you my administrator?
Are you my principal?
Why aren't you my principal? Yeah. Gosh. Awesome. Okay. So that was all fantastic. And I agree with you 100% wholeheartedly. Like,
You don't have to, but cool.
Oh, but I do. You've led me there through a series of very good points. Congratulations. Yes. So going off of that, then you've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but if you had to give advice to a young woman who wanted to be a musician, an educator, a music educator, insert other things here, I mean, I guess you do this as a teacher probably quite a bit, but what are kind of what's the, I don't want to say the standard advice, but what do you say to people who are like, who walk in and say, I want to be a teacher? Like, because I know I've gone into a room and said that and people look at me like I'm nuts. So you must obviously have a much more positive advice than maybe some of the people who have given me. So what do you got?
I joined the profession. I mean, we're in Wisconsin, right? I joined the teaching profession right after Act 10.
Yeah.
Which, for those who don't know, was a very big deal of the destabilization of the unions, right?
Yep.
Especially the education unions, through the elimination of collective bargaining.
Yep.
And it was a very pessimistic time. Still is, I think, a very pessimistic time. It was coming off the heels of No Child Left Behind. And all this kind of legislation. And I think teachers were feeling very demoralized. And so when I showed up, a lot of veteran teachers in my own school were like, I wouldn't start out teaching right now. I wouldn't join this profession right now. I'm only here because I'm going to stick with it because I love it so much, but I wouldn't start. And I was like, great, nice to meet you too. So I think the number one thing that I think I would tell any person going into any career, that they were motivated. Like this is also the thing. This idea of being able to choose your profession, right, is also a whole other thing to think about. That not everyone has the gift of being able to say that they chose their profession because they wanted to do that career, right, and they felt they had an aptitude for it. Excuse me. So I think to anyone who's saying, I want to be a musician, I want to be an educator, I want to be a insert dream career here. I would say the most important thing, especially as a woman moving through the professional world or through the world in general, um, is to know the power of your own voice and interrogate the power of your own voice, especially in your classroom. If
Right.
you're going to know the power of your own voice and the power of your perspective, believe that your voice has power, accept the responsibility that comes with that power,
Mm-hmm.
and then actively interrogate the power that your voice has in the classroom, to deconstruct the power that your voice has to give
Mm-hmm.
more of that power back to the students. I think a lot of people want to be a music educator either because of an awesome teacher they had who
Mm-hmm.
gave them musical experiences, or because they had terrible music experiences and they want to undo that. And as a young teacher myself, still a young teacher myself, but in my first years of teaching, there, looking back, there was just way too much like, this is how we're going to do things and I'm in charge and like, here's my voice, listen to me, do what I, right.
Right.
And now I'm much more about, oh yeah, let's think about that, what do we want to do today? You know, kind of thing, and turn it over to the students. And I think that's using my voice in a way that to me works toward collaborative construction of the classroom.
Right.
I'm still like implicitly guiding them in the direction that I think we should go. We're still going to hit the learning targets. We're still going to get to the content.
Right.
But because I've interrogated the power of my own voice, now I know more responsibly how to use it, and to harness it instead of just imposing it.
Right.
Classroom. So I think that's the main thing that I would say, especially as a teacher of singing, right? Know the power of your own voice, and also use it responsibly.
Nice. That's solid. That's probably better than I could do right now, especially if someone was like, I want to be a teacher. Because my experience was not fantastic.
Yeah.
But
And I
clearly,
think in order to be able to do that, right? I mean, it's
right.
back up all the steps. Like you have to be a voracious learner yourself,
Sure.
and you have to be supported. Like you
Mhm.
have to find your team of supportive people.
Right.
You have to be in the right place where your administrators and your colleagues and the families respect the power of your voice as an
Right.
educator.
Hmm.
If you're undermined at any of, or the opportunity is taken away from you at any of those levels, if there's opposition or obstacle, it's going to be really hard to apply the power of your voice the way you want to in your
Right.
classroom. And I think like what I hear from you, Mike, is just a great feeling of like having been disenfranchised in your own classroom, and that's a very painful thing. And then no matter how much you know the power of your own voice, you can't use it in the way that you want to. And so in effect, like by leaving the profession, and making different choices, you, I think, have reclaimed that power, which probably I bet feels really good.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to kind of just go off of what Jaclyn said, for those of you watching, no matter what you choose to do, regardless of it's teaching or music or anything, um, knowing your own power and the trying to think of the right word, but the um, wow, okay, I haven't done a lot of these meetings when it's late, so my brain isn't working right now.
Mhm. I think, and also like knowing the power of your own voice, and if you are a person whose voice inherently has more power
Right.
because of your positionality in the world and your privileges that you have, and we all have ordinary privileges, right?
Mhm.
Like every single person, um, to look around and say, oh, who else's voice is not heard here and
Right.
why? And it's
Right.
one reason I love this series and what you're calling it, because I think you recognize your positionality and your privilege as a man,
Yeah.
um, and are saying, "Oh, let's lift up the voices of women." Like
Mhm.
that's a cool thing.
Yeah.
That's a really cool thing, friend. And that's part of it. That's part of it too.
Right. Yeah, just being able to utilize the power that you have, regardless of your position of privilege, to make sure things like this are talked about. You
Yeah.
know, as an avid YouTube watcher, um, there you go. You know, there's all sorts of stuff out there, and not all of it is great. Um, and as a former teacher who has been around kids who are also avid YouTube watchers, because I've noticed that kids don't really care about what's on TV anymore. They care about what's on YouTube. And some of the people who are making content on YouTube are not great people. And so I'm not saying that every person should become a YouTuber and do this sort of thing, but in your life and in your choices, you have the ability to be a voice for what you believe in, but also to stand up for people who don't have that voice, whether that be a child at an internment camp, or your neighbor, or the little girl who lives down the street, or the little boy who lives down the street, or the elderly woman who doesn't get to leave her house anymore because she can't go out safely anymore. You know, you have that power, especially in a place like the United States. You're supposed to have that power and that authority. And, you know, I've been making a lot of videos about our government and how it's supposed to work. And I think one of the main key points and the main key themes of that series has been that, you know, we talk about separation of powers and how there's 3 branches of our government, but that's not really true. There's 4 branches, and the 4th branch is us. And we are supposed to be the most powerful branch. That's how it's supposed to work. And clearly, you know, better censor myself. It's not working that way right now.
Well, we'll see on Tuesday.
Yeah, we will see on Tuesday, because, you know, election day, go vote. No matter what your opinion is, go vote. But, you know, I think a lot of kids don't realize that no matter how old they are, no matter what they do, there is someone who looks up to you. And you may not realize it, but you should always, or at least this is something I've kind of started doing over the last couple of years, is that you should always act like the people around you treat you like a role model, because chances are somebody is. And your actions are going to affect how they perceive the world and how they perceive you. But if they really are treating you like a role model, they probably have that bias where no matter what you do, they're going to think you're right. Or at least they'll defend you to a point where even if they think maybe you're wrong, they'll be like, oh, but you know what though? Like, it was probably just a bad day, kind of thing. And so, you know, and I feel like that happens a lot now with our politicians. You know, it's like, oh, he's just having a bad day. That's why he's trying to take away my rights or whatever. And it's like, well, no, but us as individual people, right? We have a lot more influence over the people around us than these powerful, towering figures, because we're the ones who are interacting with everybody every day. And we're the ones who people are seeking out for knowledge because we're teachers. Or, you know, just even your friends, you know, your friends come to you and ask for help or advice. They're putting you in this position where they're respecting your opinion. And you have to be able to act in a way that, regardless of what you say, you're supporting them, and you know that in the end, they're still going to, you have to maintain that respect the whole time, you know, because you might, you know, they might be like, hey, can I sing? And you'll be like, maybe. But at the end of that conversation, they still have to trust you and know you and know that you've got their back. And it's the same thing with anything you do. If you're the boss in an accounting firm, there are people under you who look up to you and who are asking your opinion. And if you treat them like garbage, they're no longer going to respect you. You know, if you work in a grocery store, personal experience, and your boss doesn't treat you like you're worth their time, then you're not going to give them your best effort, because it's no longer, you know, it's like, why would I put forth that amount of effort for someone who doesn't care what I do?
Yeah, the power of your voice swings both ways, right?
Exactly.
power of our voices has the potential to uplift people, and it also has the potential to cut people.
Yeah.
Um, and recognizing that responsibility then becomes part of this loop of how I respond to this person in my daily life is going to impact them
Right.
and show who I am as a person.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
interrogating, like continually interrogating the power of our voice, and then using the knowledge of, oh, my voice could impact people and my community, and even just
Mhm.
impacting how one person feels. I
Right.
think knowing that changes the way that we interact with
Right.
each other. And
Yeah.
really that's the essence of chorus, right? Like you have to be aware at all times in order to be a good chorister that your voice is part of the whole. It's part of the multiplicity of voices.
Yeah.
That's also how democracy should work. So
Yeah. But and like especially with the kids we were working with, right? We're working with middle schoolers who are going through this transformative process, and everything you say to them, that they're going to remember it. Like I know that there are times, well, I mean not everything, but like they might not remember anything about actual chorus, but like they're going to know if you made them feel like crap one day, and they'll remember it forever. Like I still remember things that teachers have told me that have made me just my heart deflate. And those kind of experiences shape you.
and vice
And
versa.
and it's reversible. You can also say really positive things and do really awesome stuff for these kids, and it'll make them, they'll remember you in a different way. And it's the same thing with anybody. It's like if you do nice things to people, that they're going to remember that. And if you do it enough times, they're going to do it themselves. And so even if you're, that's what I've always, when I, now that I have my own son, um, I could care less if he, in first grade, if he learns how to do math, or if he's learning to read, or, I mean, it's great that he is, like, he's a fantastic reader. That's awesome. But like, I would much rather him be kind and a good listener and a good friend and a good person than be, a mathematical prodigy, or, you know, like a whiz kid. Like I could care less. If he's successful, that's fantastic. And I'm really happy for him that he is being successful. But I want him to be, good at making friends and being a good friend and being a good peer. And like those are the kind of things that matter to me more necessarily than whether he is awesome at the actual content. And getting back into the whole teaching conversation, um, I feel like as a teacher, there were very few parents who had that same viewpoint as me, um, who were like, yeah, like it's okay if they don't really learn that much about science. I would rather them, you know, be a good person. But instead they're like, well, I want you to make sure that they're really good at this. Like, I know that's maybe because of the school that I was at, but like, I had parents who were like, I know my son is getting like 99% in your class, but what can they do to improve? And it's like, I don't know, make a friend, go outside, like read a book. I don't know. Like, I'm not gonna give you more math work for this child because he's getting a 99%. Like, you should let him go out and experience things and be with other kids and do those sorts of things, because that's going to make a more well-rounded person in the end than being really, really good at math.
Yeah. Well, what a gift a teacher can give to have both, right? So like
Right.
I always tell my students, yeah, we're not like, I'm not going to grade you on how well you sing, but you have to sing well because no one wants to be part of a choir that sucks, right? No one wants to be part of a choir that sounds out of tune. No one wants to go to that concert. No one wants to be in that class, right? Like it's not what you're being graded on, but it's the vehicle for our learning. So you have to do it well, right? And I think, like, of course, no parent would want their kids like math teacher to be like, oh, we're not like, I don't really care if your kid like learns math. I'm most, yeah, we care about the content, but we care about teaching the kids through the content and empowering the students to own the content for themselves. And it's not just like, I'm fire hosing these concepts onto your kid. It's like your kid is learning. Your kid is learning how to learn through this, like through the gifts
Through
of
this
this
medium
content.
of whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah. And that's really where it's at. And I think I had a lot of parents who would come to me and say, is my kid good at singing? And I would always say, yes. Yeah. And here's what they're improving at, right? And every kid is improving. And also their grade is not showing whether or not they can sing. Their grade is showing whether or not they can think like a musician and be cooperative like a musician and analyze like a musician and communicate like a musician and like being a musician.
Right.
Especially because for middle schoolers, their voices are changing and sometimes it's not their fault that they can't match pitch. It's just what's happening with their vocal folds. It's just not on them. And I think, this is a beautiful example of the ways that our students' success at their learning can be measured in so many different ways. And what a gift when a teacher can find ways to uplift that and give an assignment that gets a kid to go make a friend or go outside or connect with themselves.
Do something that's not necessarily what you'd expect school to teach.
What you expect, right? Yeah. Yes, sneaky. Really good teachers are the best, like sneaky people, because you can get the students to learn in ways they didn't even know were learning.
Or magic, pretty much.
You should.
Awesome. Well, I don't really have anything else to ask you. I think we pretty much covered it. Like, is there anything that you just have to say that you feel like is just absolutely that you need to get it out there for the world to hear?
No, I think I've really enjoyed this conversation and talking about, I think more broadly, where education can go and how it can serve the students, which really is the point.
Absolutely.
And thank you for asking me part of this series, and thanks for the opportunity to chat. And it's just good to reconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you who are watching, you made it all the way to the end. Good job. So if you could subscribe and like this video, that'd be fantastic. Share it with your friends, share it with your teacher friends, because they might learn something about teaching, which is fantastic. And if not, that's okay. If you want, you can check out other videos in this series. There's currently only one, but there will be more. All of this will be on my website as well as on my YouTube channel. So you can see all of that there. And you can watch me and Jaclyn talk about awesome things over and over again if you want to, because that's what YouTube's great for. I learned that from my son, who watches things on repeat. Yes, the amount of times I've watched Moana is growing.
So
Such
good.
a good movie. But after you've seen it 150 times, it's a little old. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for watching, and see you next time.